I'm not an expert. I'm not an authority. I'm someone who has been a murderer for almost 20 years.
September 15th, 1972. A police officer in Santa Cruz, California pulls over a vehicle for a routine traffic check. The driver is cooperative, friendly. He explains he's been visiting family. When asked about a young woman who's been reported missing from the area, the man doesn't hesitate. "Oh, she's at her brother's on the East Coast," he says calmly. "Family emergency. She'll be back in a few days." The officer thanks him and waves him on. The man drives away. What that officer didn't know, what no one could possibly imagine, is that at that very moment, in the trunk of that car, just feet away from where they stood talking, was a plastic bag. And inside that bag was the severed head of the missing woman. The man's name was Ed Kemper, and he wasn't just lying to a random cop. He was lying to everyone. Because earlier that same day, he had sat through a psychiatric evaluation where 2 doctors declared him normal and safe. And later that evening, he would walk into a bar packed with police officers hunting a serial killer. Officers who considered him a friend. Officers who had no idea they were drinking with the monster they were searching for. While evidence of his latest crime sat in his trunk outside. This is the Ed Kemper case. And this is the story of how pure evil hid in plain sight. To understand how Ed Kemper pulled off something this audacious, we need to go back to the beginning. Edmund Emil Kemper III was born in 1948 in Burbank, California. His childhood was a nightmare. His mother, Clarnell, was verbally and emotionally abusive. She regularly told him he was worthless, that he would never amount to anything, that no woman would ever want him. When Ed's parents divorced and he went to live with his mother in Montana, things got worse. Clarnell was terrified of her son because of his enormous size. By his teenage years, Ed was already 6 feet 9 inches tall and weighed nearly 300 pounds. So she locked him in the basement. Night after night, an 8-year-old child was forced to sleep alone in a cold, dark basement, while his mother and sisters slept comfortably upstairs. In interviews years later, Ed described those nights with chilling clarity. "I wanted to end my mother since I was 8 years old," he said. "I'm not proud of that, but that's how I felt." The psychological damage was profound. Ed began torturing animals. He buried the family cat alive, then dug it up and removed its head. He fantasized constantly about violence. By age 15, he had had enough. He ran away to live with his grandparents in Northern California. But Ed found his grandmother just as controlling as his mother had been. On August 27, 1964, Ed shot his grandmother 3 times in the back of the head while she sat at the kitchen table. When his grandfather came home, Ed shot him too. Then he called the police and waited calmly for them to arrive. When asked why he did it, his answer was simple. "I just wanted to see what it felt like."
Ed was 15 years old. He was sent to a Atascadero State Hospital for the criminally insane. Most people thought he would never get out, but Ed Kemper was different from other patients. He had an IQ of 145, near genius level, and he used that intelligence to manipulate everyone around him. He became a model patient. He helped with administrative tasks.
He made friends with the staff, and critically, he gained access to the psychological tests used to evaluate inmates for release. He memorized the questions. He studied the correct answers. He learned exactly what to say to convince psychiatrists he was rehabilitated. On his 21st birthday, Ed Kemper was released. Against recommendations, he was sent back to live with his mother in Santa Cruz, California. The verbal abuse started immediately. She worked at the University of California at Santa Cruz and gave Ed a parking sticker for the campus. But she made sure to remind him that the pretty college girls would never look at someone like him. He was too weird, too big, too awkward. Ed had always dreamed of becoming a police officer, but every department rejected him because of his height. 6 feet 9 inches was too tall. He was devastated. Instead, he took a job with the California Division of Highways as a flagman. He bought a yellow 1969 Ford Galaxy, 2 doors, spacious trunk, and he began picking up hitchhikers. At first, he told himself he was practicing social skills, but the truth was darker. Ed was attracted to the young women he picked up, mostly college students, but he was terrified of rejection, and he realized something disturbing. "If I ended them," he later explained, "they couldn't reject me as a man. It was making a doll out of a human being, a living human doll." On May 7, 1972, Ed picked up 2 college students who were hitchhiking. He drove them to a remote location and committed his first adult murders. He placed their remains in his trunk and over several days dismembered them. The police found some remains but had no leads. The press began calling the perpetrator the co-ed killer, and Ed Kemper had discovered something. He was good at this. Very good. But Ed had another advantage that made him nearly impossible to catch. He befriended the police. Ed began frequenting a bar in Santa Cruz called the Jury Room. This wasn't just any bar. It was where local police officers, detectives, and investigators gathered after work, and Ed became a regular. The officers liked Big Ed. He was friendly. He bought rounds of drinks. He wanted to be a cop himself, so they saw him as one of their own. Just a guy who didn't make the height requirement. Officer Jim Connor later recalled, "I remember Ed being there on many occasions, especially when the murders were going on. He would come in and have a few beers with the guys and talk to us. We had no idea." The officers grew so comfortable with Ed that they gave him gifts, small tokens of friendship. And one of those gifts was a pair of real police handcuffs. The officers thought it was funny. "Here, Ed, have some handcuffs." What they didn't know was that Ed would use those handcuffs on his victims. As Ed sat in that bar night after night, he wasn't just socializing. He was gathering intelligence. Officers would discuss the co-ed killer case. They would share what evidence they had found, what areas they were focusing on, what they were looking for, and Ed would listen carefully and adjust his methods accordingly. If police were watching one highway, he would use another. The irony was perfect. The prey was sitting among the predators, and they had no idea. But the most shocking example of Ed's audacity came on September 14th, 1972. That evening, Ed picked up a young woman who was hitchhiking. He drove to an isolated location. She did not survive the encounter. Ed took her body back to his apartment, dismembered her, and removed her head. He placed the head in a plastic bag and put it in the trunk of his car, and that's where it stayed. Because the very next day, September 15th, Ed had an important appointment, a psychiatric evaluation. Ed was still on parole from Atascadero. He had regular mental health check-ins. On this day, 2 psychiatrists would examine him and determine if he was still a danger to society. Ed drove to the appointment in his yellow Ford Galaxy. He parked in the lot, and he walked inside, leaving his car with its terrible cargo sitting in that parking lot. Inside the evaluation room, Ed was calm, articulate, charming. He told the psychiatrists exactly what they wanted to hear. He said all the right things. He answered every question perfectly, because he had memorized those tests years ago at Atascadero. He knew exactly how to present himself. The first psychiatrist concluded his examination and wrote that he saw no indication Ed posed any danger. The second psychiatrist agreed. He described Ed as normal and safe. Both recommended that Ed's parole restrictions be lifted. He was officially rehabilitated. Ed thanked them politely and walked back to his car. Before getting in, he opened the trunk. He looked inside at the plastic bag, and according to his later testimony, he felt triumphant. "I was admiring my work," he said, "admiring my catch, like a fisherman." He closed the trunk. He had just been declared normal and safe by 2 trained psychiatrists, while evidence of murder sat 15 feet away. But Ed wasn't done for the day. That evening, he drove to the jury room. The bar was crowded as usual. Police officers everywhere. They greeted him warmly. "Big Ed, come on in. Have a drink." Ed bought a round for everyone. They started talking about the co-ed killer case. More remains had been found. The investigation was intensifying. The officers were frustrated. This killer was good. Too good. He left almost no evidence. He seemed to know exactly how to avoid being caught. What was his secret? They asked Ed what he thought. Ed considered the question thoughtfully. "Well," he said, "this guy is obviously intelligent. He's probably studied police procedure. He probably knows how you think." The officers nodded. Yeah, that made sense. This killer was smart. As the night went on, Ed listened to everything. An officer showed him crime scene photographs. "What do you think, Ed? You've got a good mind. What are we missing?" Ed studied the photos carefully. He made some observations. Nothing too specific, just enough to seem helpful. The officers appreciated his input. Big Ed was a good guy. Really understood police work. Too bad about that height thing. Eventually, Ed said his goodbyes and headed to the parking lot. Before driving home, he opened his trunk one more time. "I was standing there admiring what I had done," he later said, "like a trophy." He closed the trunk and drove home. He had spent the evening drinking with the very people hunting him, and they had no idea. Over the following months, Ed continued. He picked up more young women. Between September 1972 and February 1973, several more disappeared. Police had no viable suspects, and Ed kept going to the jury room, drinking with the cops, listening to their theories, staying one step ahead. One of those officers was Jim Connor. Connor and his wife had young children who needed a babysitter. They hired a reliable young woman from the university. Her name was Cynthia Shaw. On January 8, 1973, Cynthia accepted a ride from Ed Kemper. She never made it to the Connor house. She was never seen alive again. Jim Connor, the same officer who drank with Ed, who considered him a friend, had no idea that his children's babysitter had been taken by the man buying him beers. When Cynthia's remains were found weeks later, Connor was devastated. He had been investigating the co-ed killer case, and now the killer had taken someone from his own life, someone his family knew. And still, he had no idea the killer was someone he knew, someone he trusted. Ed continued frequenting the jury room even as the Cynthia Shaw case dominated conversations. He expressed sympathy to Connor. "Terrible thing. Hope you catch this monster soon." In February 1973, Ed picked up 2 more university students at a bus stop. They saw his university parking sticker and figured he was safe. Neither survived. By this point, Ed had taken the lives of 6 young women in less than a year, but the pressure was building inside him. Not from police. They still had no suspects. The pressure was psychological. Ed had been working towards something specific since childhood. He wanted to end his mother. That was always the primary target. Every victim was practice for the one that really mattered. On April 20th, 1973, Ed came home from work. His mother was reading in bed. He stopped by her room to say hello, hoping she would say something kind, something that might change his mind. Instead, she looked up and said, "Oh my God, now I suppose you're going to want to stay up and talk all night." Those were her last words to him. An insult. Rejection. At 5 in the morning, Ed carried out what he had been planning since he was 8 years old. After, he tried going to the jury room to ease his distress, but it didn't help, so he invited his mother's best friend over and committed one final act of violence. Then Ed got in his mother's friend's car and drove east, out of California, through Nevada, through Utah, all the way to Colorado. He checked into a motel in Pueblo, and there, Ed Kemper finally broke. He had done what he set out to do, but now what? He could keep running, change his name, disappear. But Ed was many things: a killer, a manipulator, a genius. But he was also someone who craved recognition. He didn't want to be a ghost anymore. He wanted people to know. Ed walked to a payphone and dialed the Santa Cruz Police Department. When an officer answered, Ed said, "I'm Ed Kemper calling from Pueblo, Colorado. I need to confess to some crimes. I ended my mother, her best friend, and those college girls, 6 of them. I'm the co-ed killer." The officer didn't believe him. Ed Kemper, Big Ed from the jury room. He thought Ed was joking. He told him to stop and hung up. Ed called back. This time, Officer Jim Connor answered, the same Connor whose babysitter Ed had taken. Ed spoke calmly. "Jim, this is Ed. I'm serious. I'm the co-ed killer." Connor's blood ran cold. He remembered Ed from the bar, the friendly giant who wanted to be a cop. He remembered Ed expressing sympathy when Cynthia went missing. And now Ed was confessing to being the killer who had taken his babysitter. Connor sent officers to Ed's mother's house immediately. When they arrived, they found evidence confirming Ed's confession. Meanwhile, in Colorado, police found Ed at his motel. He put up no resistance. "I'm glad you're here," he told them. "I want to cooperate." And he did. Over the following weeks, Ed gave detailed confessions. He walked investigators through his methods. He explained how he befriended police officers and used information to avoid capture. He admitted using the police-issued handcuffs they had given him. He described the day he had a psychiatric evaluation with evidence in his trunk, then went drinking with cops that same evening. The investigators were stunned. They had been drinking with this man. They had trusted him. They had given him information. And all the while, he was the monster they were hunting. When asked why he turned himself in, Ed's answer was chilling. The original purpose was to end my mother. With her gone, I had no reason to continue. The game was over. Ed pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. But the jury saw through it. Yes, his childhood was traumatic. Yes, he had psychological problems. But he knew right from wrong. He had methodically planned everything. He had manipulated psychiatrists and police with calculated precision. This wasn't insanity. This was evil intelligence. Ed Kemper was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. That was in 1973. Ed is still alive today at age 76, serving his sentence at the California Medical Facility. He has had multiple parole hearings but has been denied every time. And here's something remarkable. Ed doesn't want parole. He has actively argued against his own release, telling boards he's too dangerous to be freed. "I deserve to be here," he has said. "I deserve to die here." After his conviction, Ed did something unusual. He cooperated with law enforcement. In the late 1970s, FBI agents from the Behavioral Science Unit interviewed him extensively. They wanted to understand how his mind worked. Ed was forthcoming. He gave detailed interviews that were recorded and studied. He helped FBI profilers understand serial killer psychology. His interviews contributed to criminal profiling techniques still used today. These interviews provide a chilling window into a highly intelligent psychopath. Ed speaks calmly about his crimes with no remorse, but significant self-awareness. In one interview, he discussed drinking with police while being an active serial killer. "It was amusing," he said. "They were good people trying to do their job, and I was sitting there knowing things they didn't know. It was like being in on a secret." The story of Ed Kemper drinking with cops while bodies were in his trunk has become infamous. It demonstrates disturbing realities about criminal psychology. First, intelligence can be a weapon. Ed's IQ of 145 let him think steps ahead of investigators. He understood police procedure better than many officers. He manipulated psychological tests easily. His intelligence made him exponentially more dangerous. Second, psychopaths can perfectly mimic normal emotions and relationships. The officers genuinely liked Ed. They trusted him, but Ed was never experiencing friendship. He was performing it. Inside, he felt nothing genuine. They were useful sources of information. Nothing more. Third, proximity to law enforcement doesn't guarantee safety. Officers never suspected Ed because he was so familiar. He was Big Ed from the bar, the friendly giant. The idea he could be the killer seemed absurd. For the families of Ed's victims, there can be no closure. 6 young women whose lives were cut short, potential never realized, families never built, futures erased. These losses are permanent, and for officers like Jim Connor, the betrayal was devastating. He had socialized with his children's babysitter's killer. He had bought drinks for the monster he was hunting. That guilt doesn't go away. But there are lessons here. About vigilance, about not assuming familiar faces are safe, about thorough background checks and evaluations that can't be manipulated, about recognizing that intelligence and social skills can mask profound evil. Ed Kemper operated for so long because people underestimated him. They saw a friendly giant who wanted to be a cop. They didn't see the predator studying them. They didn't see the rage beneath the smile. And by the time they did, 8 people were gone. The story of Ed Kemper is a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with clear warnings. Sometimes it wears a friendly smile. It buys you a drink. It tells you what you want to hear. It sits next to you at a bar and pretends to be your friend, all the while hiding something terrible, something unthinkable. Ed Kemper drank with the cops while bodies were in his trunk. It sounds impossible, but it happened, and it stands as one of the most chilling examples of deception and manipulation in criminal history. Thank you for watching. If you found this case disturbing and fascinating, please like and subscribe for more investigations into the darkest cases in history. Remember that evil can hide anywhere, and vigilance is never paranoia when lives are at stake. See you in the next video.